The room, it is quieting down. Good afternoon. Just for everybody's notice, we are on tape and streaming live from the Athletic Club here in Columbus, Ohio. Good afternoon. I'm John Dedrick, the Chief Operating Officer of the Kettering Foundation, and on behalf of Sharon Davies, the Foundation's President and CEO, and all of my colleagues at the Foundation, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Kettering Conversations with Democracy Innovators. We're grateful to the Columbus Athletic Club for providing this outstanding venue, and to our panelists, and to each of you for making time for this important conversation about the health of our democracy in Ohio and around the nation. Founded in 1927 by Ohioan and inventor Charles F. Kettering, the Kettering Foundation is a nonpartisan, nonprofit operating foundation headquartered in Dayton, Ohio, with offices in Washington, D.C. The Foundation's mission is to advance inclusive democracies by fostering citizen engagement, promoting government accountability, and countering authoritarianism in the United States and around the globe. More information about Kettering, as well as details about our new strategic plan, titled In Defense of Democracy, is available on our website, kettering.org. And feel free to ask questions to any of my colleagues from Kettering here today. Could I ask the Kettering staff members just to raise their hands? Okay, thank you. Kettering's President and CEO, Sharon Davies, sends her regards to the group. She's streaming the event now and very much wishes she could be here. Sharon's been under the weather today, but she assures me she's on the mend, and she looks forward to reconnecting with many of you here in the very near future. Our topic this afternoon is timely and it's urgent. As we approach our nation's 250th birthday, our democracy faces major challenges that threaten to erode the functioning of representative democratic institutions at all levels of our governance. There is a severe decline in citizen trust in all major institutions, widespread partisan polarization, disagreement over questions about who has rights and who belongs, and evidence of weakened commitments to democratic norms. Daily, we're reminded that democracy is fragile, but it's also resilient. Today, we will consider Ohio as a case to spotlight the erosion of democracy in states around the country and what might be done to guard against its fragility and to bolster its resilience. It is my pleasure to introduce three outstanding Ohioans, Maureen O'Connor, David Pepper, and Nancy Rogers, who are leaders working in defense of democracy. Nancy Rogers will moderate the discussion. She's to my far left. She's a former Ohio Attorney General who's currently Professor Emeritus and Director of the Law and Leadership Program at the Ohio State Moritz College of Law. She also serves on the executive committee of the college's Divided Community Project, speaking out on ways to strengthen democracy, beginning in communities and neighborhoods. She previously served as Dean of the Moritz Law School and Vice President for Academic Affairs at The Ohio State University. Nancy is an extensively published scholar in the fields of law and dispute resolution. She's also a longtime contributor to the Kettering Foundation's programs on questions of law, justice, and dispute resolution, beginning in communities. To Nancy's immediate right is retired Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor. She was the 10th Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Ohio, the first woman to lead the state judicial branch of government, and the first Chief Justice to retire from the office. Upon her retirement, she was the longest-serving statewide elected woman in Ohio history. What's she been doing since retirement? She has been working on redistricting, and on August 14th, redistricting reform advocates with citizens, not politicians, including retired Chief Justice O'Connor, took a first step towards a ballot measure that would create a citizen-based approach to drawing legislative and congressional districts. O'Connor, a Republican, said about her active engagement and support with this important initiative, that it would end gerrymandering by empowering citizens, not politicians, to draw fair districts using an open and independent process. Justice O'Connor brings a critical voice to this threat to our democracy. Importantly, she speaks not just to the political, but to the moral foundations of democratic governance and the obligations of democratic citizenship. David Pepper, immediately to my left, a Democrat, is a former public official who was first elected to the Cincinnati City Council, where he had a reputation as a mediator, as someone who was informed on the issues and able to bridge political divides in the interest of the greater good. He served as chair of the Ohio Democratic Party between 2015 and 2021. David has become an outspoken critic of the threats to democracy facing the states. In two recent books, Laboratories of Autocracy and Saving Democracy, he makes the case for strengthening our democratic institutions by mandating greater government accountability and encouraging active citizenship. He was an active participant in the Vote No campaign in August of this year, where Ohioans defeated State Issue 1, which would have made citizen-based initiatives to amend the state constitution much more difficult to introduce and to pass. Pepper can be seen regularly on his Pepper Perspectives videos with a whiteboard and dry erase marker in hand outlining democracy-related issues. Please join me in welcoming Maureen O'Connor, David Pepper, and Nancy Rogers.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'll turn it over to Nancy Rogers now.
Thank you, John. And what a privilege it is to join people who I'm recognizing and who are fellow workers in terms of caring about our democracy and wanting to strengthen it. As John has said, the Kettering Foundation has taken such a strong lead in doing. And to be here with two people I admire, who might be thought of as people who are on different sides of the political aisle, and yet I have talked with them enough to know that their concern about the future of our nation, and particularly the democracy that we so treasure, surmounts all of those political aims. So it's a pleasure for all of us to join with you and have the opportunity to learn from you. Beginning with you, David, John has mentioned that we can think of the states as laboratories for democracy, but you've entitled your book that they could also be laboratories of autocracy. So I wonder if you could help us understand the warning signs that a democracy may be sliding in ways that we might not perceive into a more autocratic posture.
Thank you, and again, it's an honor really to be with you. Thank you to the Kettering Foundation. It's great to be on such a impressive panel, people I've admired for a long time. It's a really good question, and one way to think about it is what keeps us from seeing the warning signs here in the United States? And I think we don't see them. And I think part of the reason we don't see them is we're so caught up in our partisan world, we can't really get beyond it. We're America, so we have this narrative that we're a democracy no matter what. We take it for granted. And we also don't pay attention to a lot of the institutions that are the ones that can undermine democracy, so we don't see it. So in this first book I've written, and sometimes in these whiteboards you mentioned, I go through the exercise, okay, pretend it's not America. What would we say if we saw all the following things happening in another country, in Eastern Europe or the former Soviet Union, or the republics of the former Soviet Union? What would we say if we saw in one of those countries the rigging of elections so that almost every single outcome was guaranteed and there was no accountability whatsoever? A nonstop assault on the rule of law, threatening justices or judges, attacking the very jurisdiction of courts over political matters, defying court orders. Don't mean to bring up topics, Chief Justice, that you've lived through, but if we saw that in another country, we'd say that country has no rule of law. How about simply ignoring the results of elections? Just defying them outright. Voters vote one way, you don't even recognize the result. And then when you add all that up, and then you see one other thing that another country would be a warning sign. a direction legislatively or policy-wise that is completely the opposite of what the majority of people in that jurisdiction wants to happen. If you saw all those things in another country, we would all say as Americans, my God, that country is losing its democracy. And every single factor I just mentioned, and many more, are happening in states in this country, including in the State House right down the street. So the warning signs are very clear. We would see them elsewhere very clearly, but we have certain reasons in our own country we don't see them as clearly, and that's why conferences like this, books, that's why I wrote these books, we have to see the warning signs for what they are and for what we would see elsewhere if they were happening.
Mm-hmm. I have to think that you too were seeing warning signs, Chief Justice O'Connor. You could have done so many things as you, after a life of much admired contributions to our state, you were deciding, and you announced that your focus was going to be on the redistricting and reapportionment portion of the state constitution and an effort to amend it, and that is exactly what you've been working on and exactly what you have come to, at least a step in which you've submitted petitions now a second time for approval of the language. So I wonder if you can just give us a little background about what led you to pick that piece of strengthening democracy.
Well, I'm still waiting to retire. Even though I left, the job as Chief Justice December 31st of 22, it was an honor to have that job, quite frankly, and every job that I've had, an elected position, to be a public servant. So I've seen public service. I've seen the role of government. It's always been my philosophy, but for serving the people, we have no business being in business. Why do we need government if we're not advancing the interests of the population that has placed their trust in us as public servants? And we're going to talk about, what happened at the end of my tenure, but the redistricting cases pointed very repeatedly to the fact that Ohio is one of the worst gerrymandered states in the country, that, to quote the senator, the president of the Senate, Matt Huffman, once a supermajority was in place, that we can do pretty much whatever we want. That is not a philosophy of government. I don't care if you're won, by a landslide as a Republican, or you're won as a landslide by a Democrat. You don't jettison the citizens who didn't vote for you, or didn't vote at all. To think that we can pretty much do whatever we want, it discounts the vast majority of members of the state. So this blatant gerrymandering and its consequences became extremely obvious with the unconstitutional maps. And just as an aside, we had those unconstitutional maps because of a ruling by the federal court, not the Ohio Supreme Court. And so Ohioans in 2022 voted with two sets of unconstitutional maps, one for the General Assembly and one for Congress. They were unconstitutional. The federal court never said that they were constitutional. It was just they were trying to make the best of a bad situation. I don't know whether that is always the the motivation for judges to act, but there's, the law, and you would want to, follow that. But they made the best of a bad situation, and we had the election in 2022. And I said that, in a concurrence, to the first opinion declaring the maps unconstitutional, that, Ohioans, there's a remedy here. And that remedy, if you don't like what's happening, let me remind you, there's a constitutional right that you have as citizens, and not all citizens in all states have this ability to have a citizens-initiated movement for a constitutional right. It's not an easy thing to do. but citizens can initiate a change in their constitution, and you should look at it as a remedy if you don't like what's happening with gerrymandered maps. And I said, you know, once all the maps making and that was over with, that this is what I was going to do in my retirement, was going to look into having a citizens initiated movement that would repeal the two constitutional amendments that we have now, and have a constitutional amendment placed in our Constitution that puts the power, the authority for map making where it belongs, with the people. You know, the Constitution of Ohio starts out just like the Constitution of the United States, we the people. You know, David was extremely on point when he said, when a legislature doesn't listen to their constituents, when they pursue paths that are not what the majority of the state wants, then it's a frightening omen to the direction the state is going to take. So you have to do something, and wishing and hoping and crossing your fingers is not going to do it. So you've got to take action, and the only solution is a constitutional amendment to the Ohio Constitution that is going to create a redistricting commission that is populated by citizens, and there will be a prohibition. In other words, there will not be any office holders. They're prohibited. Lobbyists, prohibited. Relatives of office holders, prohibited. And the list goes on about those who are ineligible to sit on that redistricting commission. And other states have done it. You know, we are not reinventing the wheel here. We looked at other states. They looked at successes and challenges in other states. And we have fashioned, you know, since January until we put it on out there in August, this policy that has found its way into a constitutional amendment, and it is intentional. The contents is prescribed so that there will be no doubt with anybody reading that amendment, and no doubt with the courts on the direction and the intent and the means that are embedded in that constitutional amendment to do exactly what it is intended to do, and that is to represent the will of the people in the map making in the state of Ohio, so that there are fair districts. There are fair districts for the congressional districts, and that will ensure fair representation both in Washington and in Columbus.
Mm-hmm. Well, both of you have mentioned, as you've discussed other things, the importance of the legislature reflecting the interests of the people. And just recently, on August 8th, the people of Ohio expressed themselves by 14 points, rejecting Issue 1, which would have modified the procedures for obtaining signatures, making it much more difficult to do so, and raised the rate from 50% plus 1 to 60% for passage of a citizen-initiated amendment. And that has failed, and I'm sure that you're cheered by that, David particularly, and I wonder if we're done. If that satisfies your concern, or if you think there are other things that ought to be done to strengthen democracy in Ohio.
Yeah, so first of all, I was thrilled by the result, but I was especially thrilled, and we were talking about this before the session started, I was especially thrilled about how it succeeded. First, it was a multi-partisan coalition pushing to have people vote no, and that was really important. Republicans, in many cases, some of the most high-profile advocates to vote no were Bob Taft, Betty Montgomery, all over the state, Chief Justice O'Connor, just all over the state, the Libertarian Party, and obviously progressive groups as well. So it was this amazing coalition. And what was so wonderful was the results reflected that coalition. So I ran around the last couple of weeks and campaigned in Greene County. I went to Geauga County. I went to... where'd I go? Portage County. And I was running around these places thinking, okay, let's just reduce the margin in these places so when we run up big numbers in blue counties, we'll win. And it's not because of me, by the way, but the very places I went, Greene County, Geauga County, Portage County, voted no on issue 1. And that's really important. And I think the map coming out of issue 1 is the map that we should use to defeat gerrymandering in November of 2024. The map, if you look at it, 20-something counties voted no. A whole lot of the counties that ring Franklin County got to the high 40s, no, percentage-wise, no. Butler County, a very large county near Cincinnati, very Republican county. Chief Justice O'Connor, you probably won at 70-30. It was 50-50. You add all that up, and what you saw with issue 1 was this multi-partisan coalition, including a lot of Republicans, to their credit, who saw their party tell them to vote yes, who saw their governor, their lieutenant governor, and their state rep all tell them to vote yes, and they looked at the issue and they said, this is cheating. This isn't the democracy I know. I'm voting no. And you add all that up, and that map is very powerful. So that's the good news. But I think this calls for a couple things. One is, and this is kind of a caution for Democrats, cling to that coalition. And I write about this in my books as a theory that I believe the pro-democracy coalition is beyond party. And I've always hoped that's true. Issue 1 just showed us it is true. And so I think it's especially those who feel, and Democrats and progressives are very fired about democracy, right? But they need to see that map and think, you know what? A lot of people crossed over and voted against their own party to vote no, and we better cling to that coalition going forward. And we should work, as well as that campaign did, to break bread across many other differences and say, hey, we may be different on a lot of issues, we may think differently on issues, but all of us who voted no all stood up for democracy, and that's our great unifying theme, so let's hold on to that. And so I think that it wasn't just that it got defeated, it was the way folks came together to defeat it, and it was the map that shows us I'm thinking about sort of the politics, the county map, when I say the map. There is a pro-democracy map in Ohio to build on for 2024. I don't think it's going to be the map that Sherrod Brown can ride to victory. I think it's the map that we ride to victory to defeat gerrymandering in 24. But the one other thing I'll say on this, am I satisfied? So one of my big themes as the father of a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old who play soccer is the battle for democracy. For too long, one side has been on offense attacking democracy nonstop. And that the frontline players in their offensive attack on democracy have been state houses. That those who care about democracy have not been playing in at all. And many times not even playing defense, allowing people to do terrible things to go uncontested the next election. One side's playing offense nonstop. The other side sometimes plays defense, but largely ignores the battlefield where the other side's playing offense. And I'm saying this to say, issue 1 was defense. It was effective defense, but that's all it was. We stopped something. How do you win? You go on offense. You go on offense. You go on offense by bringing accountability to people who brought forward issue 1. Don't let them go uncontested next time. Then if you do, they'll keep doing it, won't they? And offense is saying, okay, we saved our process of collecting signatures to put things on the ballot. Let's go collect some signatures, put them on the ballot, and get rid of gerrymandering. That's offense. So my worry that is often sometimes we play defense, and although it feels like a victory, it's only a defensive victory. And my hope is we channel all the energy and that multi-party coalition that just did that great thing last month, we channel that into an offensive strategy that's for democracy. And I think, obviously, that's why this initiative is so important. There are a lot of other things we can do if we want to go on offense. I won't go through them right now, but we got to take the energy and get on offense with it.
I think that we have to examine, and it's a little sinister, what was the reason for the August 8th election, this issue 1. Was it was clearly to manipulate the vote, the percentages necessary, but why? Well, they pointed to this November's election, and they then brought, the boogeyman into the room, which was reproductive health rights, and misrepresented, with commercials where, little girl is being tucked into, bed, and somehow, if issue 1 fails, that child is going to be in danger. It was a very tenuous link, if any of you saw the commercial, but it was meant to be, a scare tactic and to front and center, and on what's going to happen in November on the Reproductive Rights Amendment. So many of the people who voted yes, take away my right for citizens' initiative given to me in the Constitution by upping the count that's necessary. Go ahead and do that, because I want to defeat what they call the abortion issue in November. So it's, I always look at it and say it's a sacrifice of the long-term gain, or sacrifice of the long-term good for the short-term gain. And the short-term gain would only really apply to if they could defeat the amendment in November. Well, that's a battle to have in November, and have a level playing field on that, and have at it, both sides. I'm not commenting on that. What I find disturbing is the structural disintegration of our Constitution that was attempted in order to defeat the reproductive right initiative, amendment in November. But even more so, I think what is even more fundamental and more motivating for the folks that were pushing yes on issue 1 is what we're trying to do in November of '24, and that is a constitutional amendment to stop gerrymandering and to then have fair and equal districts and nonpartisan, alliances. David talks about coalitions and coming together and maybe putting your politics aside and or embracing the best parts of your politics for the most part, and getting things done for the people, which is my big focus here, and momentum, that's what we want our legislature to do, and that's what we want, all of our public servants, all of our office holders to do. But if you can maintain gerrymandering, you don't have to look that far. You don't have to act that way. And who suffers? The Ohioans suffer. So I believe that the fear, the label was the Reproductive Rights Amendment to get people, fired up about issue 1. But the real threat is the initiative for, reform in our redistricting, because that's the key to breaking the back of gerrymandering.
And I know that you've talked about some of the details of the proposed amendment. I wonder, though, if you want some more time to talk about what's in it, what the benefit will be.
Well, the benefit is going to be the selection of, the creation of a citizen-populated redistricting commission. Right now, I'm sure everybody in this room knows, but right now we have the governor, the Secretary of State, and the auditor as members of the redistricting commission. Then we have 4 legislators. We had initially the President of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, the Minority Leader of the House, and the Minority Leader of the Senate. None of those people should be on a redistricting commission. And, our governor has said the same thing. He doesn't think the governor should be on the redistricting commission. It's self-serving. They're conflicted out of making these decisions. It's kind of government 101, but yet we have that in Ohio, and that's the creation of our redistricting commission. So we need to fix that. first of all. And so the proposal in this amendment is to have a 15-member redistricting commission, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and 5 independents. And again, I spoke a few seconds ago about who can't sit on these, commissions. The people who will apply to sit on these commissions will be thoroughly vetted to make sure there's no wolf in sheep's clothing, that there is no gamesmanship going on, that they are who they say they are, their background is what they say it is, and we want a cross-section from around the state of people to populate this 15-member commission. We want we want diversity, obviously, on this commission, and we want them to create maps that, and there's criteria for the creation of these maps. One of the things the maps aren't going to pay attention to is the current address of the address of current legislators, because that should not be a consideration on how a district is drawn in the state of Ohio. That's specifically said in the Constitution. That won't happen. That it will take into consideration the cohesive interests of people in the state. And it's going to also take into consideration geographical boundaries when their interest, surpasses, the interest of groups and communities, cohesive, groups and communities. All of this will be put in, I want to say in open court, but it's not going to be court. It's going to be an open session before the 15-member redistricting commission. And the citizens of Ohio and anybody else that wants to listen to the evidence that will come their way at public hearings so that they can make a decision about the maps. The maps will be drawn by professionals, not as they were this last go-around, employee of the President of the Senate. Free of influence, let's put it that way, do you think those maps might be, or the instructions given? It is, and I've heard it described, that this is a complex amendment. And it is really not a complex. That's what the opponents want to say. Oh, it's too complicated. Number one, you're never going to be able to find 15 impartial registered voters of Rs, Ds, and independents. Really? Out of 11 million people? You're not going to be able. Do our elected officials have no trust in our, the population they serve? Is that what they're saying? There is no trust in the people that put them there? I mean, the people place trust in them. It's a two-way street, the way I look at it. And so we need, that respect and that trust, because I do believe we can find 15, well-motivated, well-qualified people to do this arduous task. Really, we're asking a lot. And again, it's prescribed so that there are content in the amendment that will be clear. It'll be clear to lawmakers. It'll be clear to citizens. It'll be clear to the Supreme Court that this is what the Constitution is all about. This is the way the goals of the Constitution will be met, and this is what will happen in how we redistrict in the state of Ohio. And we are going to be a better state because of it. Yes, it will be tough to get there, which is probably your next question. How far along and what are we doing? Well, we did submit a second edition, as I say, to the Attorney General and the summary and the amendment. Mr. Yost will have 10 days to respond and give it a stamp of approval, hopefully. Then it will go on to the ballot board. This is no different than any other path to take to get onto the ballot. It goes to the ballot board. The ballot board will decide whether it is a one subject or whether it should be broken up into more than one subject, which means more than one amendment. We believe very strongly it is one subject. It's only about redistricting. And then that will be, I'm presumed, challenged. Whichever way that is the ruling, there will be challenged in the Supreme Court. And that's going to take some time, obviously. Get through the court. Then, depending on what the court says, there could be a lot of different directions. Do we have to regroup and have more than one ballot measure? That's going to be a very, very difficult hurdle to overcome. But I'm confident that the court will do the right thing, and it will be seen as one issue, one amendment, one ballot issue, and then the ballot language has to be created. Of course, we have to gather the signatures. How could I forget about the signatures? 4 million, or excuse me, how many 100,000? 425,000 thereabouts valid signatures. You got to collect double that in order to ensure that the people who are signing the petitions are registered voters and meet the criteria to do so. And that takes time and that takes money. And we understand that, and there are interests that stand ready, willing, and able to dive in with both feet in order to make this happen. And just by way of example, we had to submit two petitions. They're supposed to have 1,000 signatures each when you submit these, this matter to the Attorney General. I think the first one might have had 7,000 signatures on it, and that's collected like over a weekend, 7,000 signatures. To me, that just indicated the citizens' interest in doing this and the support that we have even now from the citizens. The second one, I think they limited themselves to maybe 3,500, just even though you needed 1,000, why show off, right?
So both of you have talked about a bipartisan initiative for democracy. And you have said, David, you think that there's now a bipartisan strategy that can be followed. And you've also mentioned I think that you support what Chief Justice O'Connor and her colleagues are putting forward. What else is on your, not your policy agenda in your previous hat as chair of the Democratic Party, but your pro-democracy strategy list? What would fall after her initiative passes? I
mean, to start, I will say, I think the original sin of so much of what's going on is gerrymandering. And it's not just because I think one party, and this is done by different parties in different states, let's be honest, but it's not because one party somehow has a few more numbers than it should. Maybe in some states a majority that it shouldn't have, in other states a larger majority that it should have. The real breakdown in democracy because of gerrymandering is actually that, and this was the big fight last year over those maps, it's the lack of almost any office holder in the majority who ever faces a real election. And that lack of accountability, where people can do whatever they want, as Matt Huffman said, and they know no one can do anything about it, that's what's really pulling the string. So I think to start, the gerrymandering is so critical. And I want to talk about it for a second. This isn't easy, but it's so important. And I love both the politics and the policy here. The policy, the truth is, once you have pretty clear criteria about how to do a map, it's not all that hard to get to the map. The hard part has been, how do a bunch of politicians with self-interest draw a map that doesn't get called out as illegal as it happened? That's why we had 7 court cases. It's hard to cheat if there are rules about gerrymandering, and that's what's led to all the complication. I believe if we took 9 members of this audience randomly selected and gave you the criteria and gave you some programmers, you all would come up with some good maps. We've seen this play out in Ohio many times. Citizens have been submitting maps for years to follow the criteria. Their maps are amazing. Whose maps are always terrible? The politicians, because they're not actually trying to serve the criteria. They're serving themselves. So I think that the policy here, as long as you get the politicians away from the table, and you have citizens selected in a way that isn't randomly picking people, although those randomly picked people would be a lot better than the current politicians, I can tell you that. But if you have a process that is very cleanly selecting independent-minded people, we will get to the right result. And the other politics here that I think is really important is the first thing they're going to say against it is, oh, they're taking this away from the elected officials. They said that in 2012 when they defeated an effort like this. And the answer is, yeah, well, Ohio tried your way. Multiple times. We went through the elected officials, the politicians doing it for themselves, and you have failed again and again and again, and you violated the Constitution. So you're fired from this role, and we're going to go to the citizens this time. So I think they can't bring back their old mantra because that is what was gone with, and it absolutely, we saw what they do when they're the ones at the table. Other things, and the whole second book I wrote, Saving Democracy, is all the things we can do. I want to mention one here that in states like Ohio is so important, beyond gerrymandering, beyond running everywhere. And I think one of the problems in this country is we have too many elected officials, not only in gerrymandered districts, but who are unopposed completely. 50% of the Tennessee legislators who kicked out those 2 state reps, unopposed last November. Unopposed. They're being reappointed to office more than elected, and that, again, that lack of accountability is poisoning everything. But forget all that for a second. That's a little bit partisan. True nonpartisan. So much of the attack on democracy is coming from the attack on voters that those in power fear will vote against them. That's the voter suppression in Ohio. That's the purging of the Obama coalition nonstop since 2011. That's a new voter ID bill that wasn't based in any way on voter fraud, because we always hear how Ohio runs great elections, don't we? And so that attack on the majority that people are afraid of is having real impacts on close states. And one of the things I'm most frustrated about is that we don't see that all of us, way beyond partisans, can be playing a role in ushering these suppressed voters back into the democracy they've been removed from. And I'll just give a couple examples of this that I go through in great detail in the book. Every single homeless shelter in the state of Ohio and food bank and health clinic should be registering every single person who walks through that door. It should be part of the intake process. Because if you're in the city of Cleveland or Columbus or Cincinnati, those are the very voters being targeted by the purging or by the voter ID law. And we too often wait around for the final month of an election hoping some partisan volunteer finds that person, registers them, when we are actually interacting with them every single day through services we provide, and we don't even bring up democracy. And so one of the things that Valerie Lemmy, we work together in Cincinnati, if I were a city council member now, I would ask my city manager, Valerie was our city manager, what is every public-facing service we provide as a city? Every single one, rec centers, health clinics, libraries. And when people walk in that door, the citizens of Cincinnati who have been purged for 11 years, what are we doing every time they walk in that door to ask them and invite them back into the democracy they had been removed from? So engage at that rec center, register, have a kiosk where they can sign up online. Do the same thing in every library. And if you go around, once you see this, Sherrod Brown did this as Secretary of State. He had every single McDonald's have it on the tray, a voter registration form. Small businesses could be doing this everywhere. And once you see it the way I now see it, I'm eternally frustrated that almost none of this happens. We are seeing people relentlessly removed from our democracy, and we hope that the last few months of an energized effort at like Findlay Market in Cincinnati, chasing down people saying, are you registered, is gonna solve the problem. It will solve it when all of us say we all have footprints in this world. City leaders, nonprofit leaders, we're on boards, we volunteer, we give to a nonprofit. If you're on that nonprofit board, that food bank board, ask them, are we registering people who we serve? Oh, we're not? Why aren't we? Let's start that right away. All of that could be happening right now, and separate from gerrymandering, That is another big way we could fight back for democracy. And everything I just mentioned is completely nonpartisan. So you're doing it completely appropriately, every nonprofit. And if I were the city council member, I'd also, by the way, and this, Valerie, you might have pushed back on this a little bit, I would actually say, if you get a contract from this city to provide those services, part of what we expect you to do is not just provide the food, provide the health care, but part of your core mission forevermore is to lift those you are serving on our behalf with our dollars into democracy by including a pro-democracy mission in what you're doing every day. And that's part of the deal. If you're doing service for people, part of our service has to be we're giving them direct help, but we're also lifting them back into democracy they've been intentionally removed from in far too many states. So that's a big part of what I push for.
And I'd like to just follow up on that. The name of the organization going forward for the constitutional amendment is Citizens, Not Politicians. It's not voters, not politicians. It's citizens, not politicians. And that was done intentionally because, we talked about it, and I want to see citizens who have lost faith in our government and voting. How many times do you hear, especially from young people, it doesn't matter, my vote doesn't matter? I mean, I think in some ways it's a cop-out for not, registering and not showing up. But in many ways, the people who have been at it a while, and they just feel like it's a useless effort and they don't bother any longer. And then it leads to, as David said, the purging of voter rolls. But with this, this movement, citizens, not politicians, we want, of course, voters, absolutely. We want them to be active. We want every voter, to go to the polls. But we want citizens who are not registered, or citizens who are registered and have thrown up their hands and say, it's not worth it, I'm not going to exercise my right to vote, to engage and end up taking an interest and getting hope, saying to themselves, well, wait a second, this is a different movement. I haven't seen this before in the state of Ohio quite like this. I haven't heard people talking about this. This transparency is pretty cool. The fact that you're going to have an independent 15-member of citizens, a broad range of citizens. That hasn't been done before. Let's give it a try. Let's see. And we're going to talk about it, and we're going to, go across the state and explain the value. And people, even now, when I talk to people about it, they get it. They understand. They're supportive. They're enthusiastic. And I think, quite frankly, issue one's defeat in August was, maybe lit the fuse on the rocket, and the rocket's still, in the trajectory, and we'll see what happens to that trajectory in November. I think that we're going to have a booster, to use rocket terms, which I know absolutely nothing of what I'm talking about.
It's working well.
Really. And then, and that's going to carry that rocket all the way to next November, and we're going to have a new constitutional amendment in the state of Ohio.
Both of you have taken a risk in prioritizing democracy. There is obviously a risk that people will say you're not being loyal to your party. And yet your whole point is that loyalty to the party is about getting things done for people. How can the people on Zoom and the people here with us, how can they persuade office holders to put democracy ahead of particular partisan thrusts, when sometimes destroying or weakening democracy would get something through that particular lawmaker or leader wants to get done?
I think that there are many, many office holders that don't understand what we're talking about, that they're just satisfied with, the status quo. And this is both in Ohio and in other states. I'm not just singling out this mindset of partisans that occupy the position of elected officials. It happened in New York, the legislature there. They drew gerrymandered, and their Supreme Court a couple of years ago said, this is a gerrymandered map. You know, you have to start over, and they did. And there's other examples of democratic states that, that have done the same thing. So this is, a sin that's been visited on both parties, I guess, the way to look at it. And so this kind of a remedy is available, and it's a nonpartisan remedy. And to me, if I'm an office holder and I go through, the oath that I take, I read our Constitution. You read all of the, eloquent words that have been spoken about government in this state, and you walk into whatever the voting session is, and you just wait for your instructions on how to vote, and you vote along party lines. Wouldn't that demoralize you? I would kind of say, what am I doing here? Because I'm not upholding the Constitution, the concept of we the people. I'm upholding the concept, and many times, we the party. And I know that the response is going to be, well, what's good for the party is good for the state. Just look at it. We're the party of business, or we're the party of, whatever, labor, or we're the party, So whatever we do, the ends justify the means. No. I'm sorry, that's not an excuse, and that will never fly.
So my advice is especially at the state level, the reason state houses have become such an effective, sort of the institution to attack democracy, to really be, when I said laboratories of autocracy, it sounds like maybe this guy's exaggerating and trying to sell books. No, that's how they're behaving. And one of the main reasons they behave that way is they have the power to gerrymander. They have power over almost every issue we all care about, so they can use that unaccountability to do some really bad things, in my opinion. But do you know the other reason why they become the perfect place to do all this? Because no one pays attention to them. When I was on city council or county commission, people came down and told us when we were doing something wrong. But at that state house, and the polls show this, almost no one can name their state rep, which only gets worse when they aren't even opposed. So my first answer to your question is, go make some noise. Go to the local district meeting and tell them, hey, I don't like the way you're voting. You voted for that issue 1. That was terrible. What are you thinking? We in Greene County voted no on that. We can't believe you voted yes on that. And then show up at the hearings. Show up at the hearings here. Because the silence and the lack of phone calls and the lack of emails allows them to keep doing it. And if by the way, the inverse of this, which is good, is if you are in a political environment where you almost never hear anything ever from anybody, you don't get phone calls, you don't get emails, no one comes to the hearings. When they do, you're kind of scared. Oh my gosh, what did we say that led to this? Like that, by the way, the first issue 1 rally when they voted for it, 1,000 people. That set the tone for the whole thing. So there's a lot I would say about how you message well around these issues. And one of the things about messaging on democracy, I believe, is to a lot of people whose lives are difficult, it still feels very 30,000 foot, okay? So one of the things that I think we all have to do is explain, it's not just about a 30,000 foot theoretical debate on democracy. Democracy undermined will change your life in ways that are terrible. And that's one reason democracy is being attacked, to impose things that most of you don't want. That's the goal. So we have to connect that democracy debate to real-world issues that people who have difficult lives don't have time to think about the democracy battle, but they're thinking about those issues, like post-Dobbs being such a clear example. But when it comes to the office holders themselves, number 1, noise, show up, show that you're paying attention, track the votes. That all, in a world where they are used to having nobody show up. No one say a thing except in a bubble of, oh, thank you, you're doing a great job. You say, you know what, I like you personally maybe, but you're not doing a good job. That vote was terrible. You didn't represent us when you voted that way. on that issue, on issue 1 or something else, that presence is more than half the battle. And then figuring out how to message it well is the other. And the other one is, don't just do this if you're in a blue area to your blue state rep. And I think a lot of people in very conservative areas feel very disempowered. Oh my gosh, I'm so outnumbered. Well, your phone call to your state rep then in some ways even matters more, because they're really not used to hearing criticism. But if you're calling from, a Republican county saying, hey, I'm your constituent, I do not like your vote on issue 1, and you get all your friends to do the same thing, that's the kind of thing they're not used to hearing, and I think that also starts to make a difference. They are living in a world of no accountability. Any way you can bring accountability, bring it. Run, support people running, or just show up at meetings and hold them accountable by just talking about what they're doing in a way that you believe. So all of that, I think, is a way to start changing the curve on these out-of-control, unaccountable systems we're stuck with.
Thank you. Ideas for the people who are listening and want to do something about this.
I like the idea of grassroots effort, because it grows, and the whole concept of top-down in what we need here in the state. In some ways, yes. In some organizations, yes. But when David said, go to your state legislator and state senator and talk to them. They have district offices. Put together a group, a couple neighborhoods at a church basement or whatever. Invite the legislator there when they're not in session, so there's no excuse that I'm going to be in session, I can't come. Set it up so you accommodate their schedules, so that they can accommodate your schedule, so that they can hopefully accommodate your wishes.
And I'm going to ask it again because I think it's so important. Are there other ways to speak out? Are there other ways that people can contribute to strengthening their state democracy?
I mean, I've mentioned some. I would say any way you can directly talk. I have a friend who's a very good advocate on State House advocacy, who used to be an aide in one of the state representative offices. And I always call her and I quote her a lot in the second book I wrote. One thing she said to me is, listen, it's not like Congress where you get tabulated on some switchboard and the number. There only are 2 aides at best in these state rep offices. So her advice was keep calling. Never yell at the aide. They're working hard. They're probably in their mid-20s. This is a really important job for them. Be polite, build a relationship, and over time, she said, you don't know how effective that could be if you actually are calling and talking. You're not just a number like you are in Congress. So her advice, I'll just quote her, obviously show up to the district meeting, show up at the State House for a committee meeting, but even get to know some of the aides who are the front line, who will say to their rep, gosh, we've gotten like 40 calls in the last day on this from people who I've gotten to know, and they're actually really reasonable people. Like, you might want to think about this issue. So I think some of it is building, I'm not afraid to be pretty direct when I think something wrong is happening, but also being smart enough to build relationships with some of those frontline folks so that when you call, they're not jumping off the call. They actually know, hey, this is so-and-so. They call every few months it's always legitimate, it's always good faith, and they and others have called a number of times. They're inviting us to a meeting. That kind of consistent advocacy, I think, really does add up as well. A couple other things. I think we're talking a lot about State House here. But right now, in 2 months, we have school board races. And everything I've just said, school board is a frontline democracy position at this point. All the debates about book bans or no bans, what we teach, that's all school board. And so everything I'm saying, again, State House applies to school-level decisions. The board meeting where they're making decisions about banning books or not. The school board races. There's some people putting a lot of money into these that have an agenda. I'm disturbed. I'll just say I am. Figure out which candidate is which and vote for the ones you agree with. Don't let these sneak by. So what we're seeing in this country, it's very hard right now in the paralysis of Washington to push through sort of an anti-democracy agenda. There's so many reasons why it doesn't happen there. And that's pushing it down to state level, state house level, and now school board. In some states, you have elected elections officials. That's another one. So start thinking about all the layers of politics that too often we think of as a bench for some other office. It's not a bench if democracy is involved. That's the front line. So whether you're running, whether you're paying attention to who's running, think about all these positions, their impact on democracy, and you will quickly see they all have a major impact. And so go to the school board meeting just as you go to the state house meeting. Pay attention to that school candidate just like you would to the state house candidate. And think about that at all different levels of politics.
And encourage people, if not you, because of whatever reason, you don't feel qualified or you're unable to be on a school board, run a race, but you could identify people that are, offer them support. You've got maybe a young mother has school-age kids, offer to babysit those kids on the nights that she's got to be at the school board. Put some real practical support besides just, at the time of the election, we'll support you to get you in the office, and then it's a struggle. So do some real practical things about helping people to help you in their elected positions. And, as I mentioned, I agree 100% with David. What's happening in our school systems or what's not happening in our school systems, we have not been paying enough attention to over the many years. And as a result, we do have some, lethargic citizens because they've never had civics taught to them in the way that maybe we did, as in school, and the importance. But that, when the analysis is done, by social scientists, and they look at why, what's the path to where we've gotten to where we, how did we get here, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that people do not understand how a representative form of government works. And that is frightening, because if you don't understand how a representative form of government works, you're going to step back and say, it's too complicated, let them do. If they want to do it, let them do it. That's always the fallback position. And our school systems, I believe, are morally obligated to teach civics. And they're not, I wouldn't say the same about maybe trigonometry, but I think, I think there's a moral obligation to teach civics. And I think organizations that engage with youngsters, we have Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, they do that. They've got badges, for that sort of thing. Let's follow that type of an example. You want to do something practical? Let's get kids involved so that when they do turn 18, they can't wait to register to vote on their birthday. I think we're going to change. We can change the state, your community, the state, and the nation by doing that sort of initiative.
Can I jump in there real quick on that last point? I mean, going back to this footprint, if you're on a school board, if you're an administrator of a university, what are you doing to in-house your administration registering those kids? Getting them the ID they now need. Mm-hmm. Why are we relying on only student organizations to run around and figure it out? They're busy. They've only got 4 years. They're applying for jobs. Every single university in this state who is training these young people to be citizens should feel a responsibility to get all those kids in this new complicated ID system they've just created, which a big target of is young voters who may not be from Ohio. Well, it shouldn't just be the kids, the students, I don't mean to call them kids, the students figuring out how to navigate that. The schools should take ownership of it and say, hey, you're registering for classes? Well, right on the same desk, you can register to vote in Ohio. You're given a student ID, which doesn't count anymore for voting. Here's an ID that does count for voting. Here you go. The school, again, footprint. Use your footprint. If any of you are involved in those kind of universities, have the conversation. If I run into someone who is, I do. The other one is high schools could do the same thing. The numbers are just so low when it comes to 18, 19, 20. A good friend of mine is on the school board in Cincinnati. He's trying to bring this type of thing into the schools. And just a bigger picture for 1 second, whether it's schools or everything else, just to take a step back. And this is a real criticism I have of the Democratic Party. Why are all these things being viewed as bench and not frontline? Why are so many seats uncontested? Because we've myopically convinced ourselves that the only races that matter are federal races in swing areas. That's what we valued for decades. And because of that, we basically sent a message to everybody else, it's nice if you run or not, but we don't really value that because it's not going to make a difference as to whether you win the U.S. Senate, the House, or the presidency. And so we've had an infrastructure that has literally valued only those types of races, and all these other races have been sort of left out. And we have to, from whether it's encouraging people, as the Chief Justice mentioned, supporting them, even in a tough district, celebrating their run as a valuable form of public service, we have to start valuing running everywhere at all levels and not only a few swing seats that have federal impact. That's a mistake that we just keep paying for when it comes to democracy itself.
Some questions from the audience. Yes, I can't see well, but, oh, would you?
Good afternoon. First, I want to thank you for your...
Got a microphone coming.
Good afternoon. First, I want to thank you for your service on behalf of the citizens for the state of Ohio. I want to thank you for your passion, and I've enjoyed listening to your comments. My question is, as you talk about democracy and you look at what's happening on the national level, I'd like to know how you feel about outside influences, the money that comes from other states, other individuals who try to influence what is happening in the state of Ohio. Thank you.
Chief Justice?
That is a reality on both sides, where you're going to have money from groups that care about what happens in Ohio. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that once Citizens United was decided by the United States Supreme Court, and money is speech, and everybody has the right to speak through your pocketbook. But the organizations that step in, they have a reason to do so. And you can't say, well, your reason's pure and yours isn't, so we don't want you in the state of Ohio, but we do want your money in the state of Ohio to help us advance something like reproductive care and that sort of thing. So we're not going to end that, and it is, you actually can't, I think, legally restrict that. So yes, you're going to have those kinds of influences on the elections in Ohio and every other state. Well, I shouldn't say every other state, because there's some states where money doesn't come in because they look at it as a fait accompli one way or the other, and it's not worth putting the money in, or the issue isn't something they care about. But I believe that when it comes to democracy and strengthening democracy, and Ohio is ripe, for this, this constitutional amendment, we're going to see support across the board, but we're also going to see opposition across the board, and we know that, and it would be naive to think not.
And David, I see you nodding, so I might take another question with your permission
Well,
rather than...
all I was going to say is there's the counter to that is that there really is a growing power of small dollars that are becoming very important. And so the concern is real, especially when they spend millions on an ad saying don't allow out-of-state donors to buy your state, when that was what the ads were paid for. But on the flip side, the good news is the candidates who are really succeeding are many of them doing it because they're inspiring thousands and thousands of people to give $5 or $10. And that, in some ways, is democratizing the process versus the big dollar. So that's the hopeful part of, I think, what is also a troubling trend.
Yeah.
Another question. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you both for this discussion. One of the questions that I would have is, when we think about the attacks of democracy, we're also thinking about the attacks on multiracial democracy. And how important is it for us to make sure we're also talking about what is often the elephant in the room, race, and the attacks on race, when we have a long history and a long parallel of the backlash to Reconstruction, the backlash to the Voting Rights Act, and now the period we're in? How do you band together these pro-democracy coalitions when that still seems to be a dividing line that folks don't want to talk about race whatsoever?
I'll just say,
Go ahead, David.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the pattern of America. The attack on democracy did not begin because Donald Trump won. It began because Barack Obama won. This was part of the historic backlash, Reconstruction, painful example. I teach this in my law school class. Just the painful, repeated backlash whenever diverse democracy emerges in this country. And we better be clear about it. And we better not let anyone censor it. And it always seems that the history they're trying to censor is that history. And we have to see it very clearly, because if we don't see it that clearly, we won't really overcome it. If we think it's only about, oh, Donald Trump made everyone act this way, and not, no, this was after 08. The gerrymander was in 11. The purging was in 11. The suppression was in 11. Trump wasn't running for anything then. It's because of a fear, not just that Obama won the White House, but that a diverse coalition got its way in 08 at the State House too. And so I think we have to see it, because that's our history. We have to talk about it, but I think by seeing it, we also will solve it better. So absolutely, we have to always make that connection. The parallels to our history, if you see them, are so disturbing. And right now, those warning signs we talked at the very beginning are so similar to what happened in Jim Crow, it should scare everybody. But by seeing them, you also can prepare better to deal with them than if we're blind about what's really going on.
Chief Justice?
No, you did a great job. We've got 2 minutes left. We could probably take another question back there.
One more, I think, in the back.
Oh, sure. Hi, thanks. I've got to think that one of the big reasons that people feel alienated from the democratic process is when a president can lose the popular vote but still win the presidency. Do you think that the Electoral College will ever be abolished in our lifetimes?
Chief Justice?
I don't know that there's a strong movement to, there's criticism, there's always criticism. It goes back to, it goes back generations, but one of the ones that was most starkly done was Bush v. Gore. You look at that race and subsequent races where, the popular vote was not the Electoral College vote. You look at counting the Electoral College votes and how that played on January 6th and gave impetus to, the skewed legal thoughts that how that was going to work. Maybe that's a reason alone to do away with the Electoral College, but I am not advocating for doing away with the Electoral College. It does have, makes some sense, yes.
And I'm going to stop there because I know John has some comments to close. I just want to thank you both. This has been such a privilege.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's give our moderator and panelist one more hand. I listen to the conversation and I hear a call for a fresh narrative about democracy, a fresh narrative that draws on much of our history. It's a narrative in which the word we the people repeats and repeats over and over. It's a larger we in we the people. David Pepper talked about a pro-democracy coalition that is larger than party. And Maureen O'Connor said, we the people or we the party? At risk in the larger we the people is whether we can be a fully inclusive democracy, a kind of democracy that can avoid the risk of a structural disintegration of the Constitution, to quote one of our panelists. To do this, we must reach beyond people who are currently voting. We must reach youth. We must reach people who've grown tired of the process. We must ask people to bring people back, quote, back into the democracy that they're a part of. We must reach youth. And it involves each of us being involved at every level of politics in our lives, from our neighborhoods to the level of the nation state. It involves our education system. It involves our schools. It involves youth. It involves including a pro-democracy agenda in what we do every day. And it involves helping, quoting Justice O'Connor, helping people to help you when they are elected positions. Help those you are electing do their jobs. Thank you very much. I want to thank a number of people, I'm just really moved by this conversation. Thank you on behalf of the foundation to each of you for the work you're doing here, your candor, your commitment to making our democracy work for everyone. Thank you, Nancy Rogers. Thank you, Justice O'Connor. Thank you, David Pepper. And I want to thank everybody in this room and online who have participated in this conversation with Democracy Innovators. We'll be posting a video of this event on the Kettering website soon, and we'll continue to share what we've heard on social media. Please keep an eye out for future Kettering Conversations. They will happen. Finally, on behalf of our president, I want to thank the team at the Kettering Foundation that's done all the hard work, most of it behind the scenes, to organize today's program. Derek Barker, Valerie Lemmy, and Melinda Gilmore developed the program and worked with their panelists. Our communications team is led by Melinda Gilmore, working with Sarah Murphy, Kenny McGuane, and Jamal Bell. Kate Snyder coordinated with the athletic club and its vendors and made sure we all made it to Columbus. Let's give them all a hand. Thanks again for joining this afternoon. There are refreshments in the back of the room, and we hope you can stay for a while and continue the conversation.